huge, hairy, bad-smelling creature thought by some to stomp around.
Few pieces of footage are quite as divisive as the Patterson-Gimlin film, and I think that fact is perfectly encapsulated in this article. Film introducing Bigfoot to world, still mysterious 50 years later, by John Rossman. Although it's been decades since the Patterson-Gimlin film turned a Northwest legend, Bigfoot, into a household name, the footage and stories behind it still remain fascinating 50 years later. The filmmakers and namesakes of the film are two former rodeo men from Yakima County in Washington. One, Bob Gimlin, still lives there. Roger Patterson died in 1972. They shot the footage of the banks of Bluff Creek in Northern California. Bigfoot is seen on film for less than 1 minute, but one frame, 352, has pretty much become the universal symbol for Sasquatch. And that famous giant walking ape is actually a she. Her name is Patty. But what might be the most surprising, after a half-century of advancement in film and costume technology, is that this footage has yet to be officially debunked. Furthermore, it's concrete proof for Bigfooters around the globe that the Sasquatch is in fact real. At this point, I'm as confident as I can be, short of standing on the sandbar with Roger and Bob, and witnessed it myself, said Jeffrey Meldrum. Meldrum is a professor of anatomy and anthropology at Idaho State University, and he's known for being one of the few academics to openly study Sasquatch. It's also easy to say, obviously that's a man in a fursuit, until you see it up against a man in a fursuit, he said. I'm going to come back to this article later on to highlight a point that this anthropologist is making that's actually very important for the validity of the footage. The idea of Bigfoot is one of those things that is quite divisive, not just in regular society, but also in academia, and honestly, I don't really understand why. Although I wouldn't really think it would be likely that a giant ape could roam around the forests of Washington, Oregon, and Northern California, it's actually not impossible. We know for a fact that not too long ago, there was a giant ape doing just that. There are no biological reasons as to why Bigfoot wouldn't exist. And the area where Bigfoot would live would offer a forest dense enough to explain why sightings of this creature would be so rare. And if the creature is intelligent enough, it could evade capture. This of course doesn't mean that Bigfoot does exist, and anyone mentioning what I just said as reasons to believe that Bigfoot exists is a fucking moron. The thing is, when it comes to Bigfoot, you have such a sheer amount of tribalism on both sides, I notice. The people who want to believe in Bigfoot will take anything as evidence of Bigfoot's existence. At the same time, among academics who honestly should know better, simply suggesting that maybe Bigfoot could exist results in an immediate scoffing, which I frankly find to be unjustified. However, the video you're about to watch is probably gonna piss off both camps. If you guys really want to claim that you're skeptics and whatnot, and you're just out for the truth, then accept the evidence for what it is, whether it goes against or for the existence of Bigfoot. And it is the evidence that I'm going to focus on in this video. I make these videos because I'm genuinely curious and I want to see where the evidence actually leads. And honestly, the results are quite surprising, I have to say. Anyway, let's begin. Let's focus on an argument that many people who don't believe in Bigfoot bring up. That it's probably just a man in a costume when it comes to the Patterson-Gimlin film. But is it really just a man in a costume, or is there more to it? You remember that article that I read at the very beginning of this documentary? Well, I'm gonna return to it now and read this part of the article. The film evidence. Jeffrey Meldrum points no further than the Planet of the Apes franchise. The first film came out around the same time as the Patterson-Gimlin film, and won an Oscar for makeup. He specifically calls up a scene in the sauna in the 1970 sequel, Beneath the Planet of the Apes. The apes are bare-chested. A few walk around the steamy room. Meldrum says these costumes are at the bleeding edge of film technology, and he's not impressed. They look like big hairy Pillsbury doughboys, he said. Meldrum compares to the Patterson-Gimlin film, which he shows to his anatomy students. He asks them to point out different landmarks in surface anatomy they see in Patty. They start at the head, and then they can see the trapezius. They can see the deltoid, erector spine down the back, shoulder blades moving under the skin. The quads contract when they're supposed to contract, he said almost breathlessly. None of which ever show up in a cheap, off-the-shelf costume. But costume manufacturer Philip Morris claimed just that. Before he died, Morris gave talks about how he sold Roger Patterson the suit seen on the film. His talk, featuring examples of the faked Bigfoot, was featured on Travel Channel's Making Monsters. I would, however, like to point out that Philip Morris's story has never actually been proven or even really corroborated in any way. And as we are about to see, his story is most likely false. Simply because of the fact, like this anthropologist pointed out, the bleeding edge technology of costume making at the time was not very impressive. Keep in mind, the Planet of the Apes movies were at the time considered to be very impressive movies in terms of costume making. However, even by the 1980s, these costumes are seen as amateurish at best. The truth of the matter is, the ability to make truly impressive and realistic costumes, even of our closest primate cousins, was not very well developed at the time. The Planet of the Apes came out a year after the Patterson-Gimlin footage. And if you compare them side by side, it becomes quite apparent even for a normal person. Never mind actual special effects technicians. The idea that Patterson somehow had access to a suit that was more convincing and more realistic than what a multi-million-dollar movie had access to seems quite unrealistic. The technology at the time to make convincing costumes just wasn't really there, and I doubt it's something that a common person like Robert Patterson would in any way be able to afford, especially not for such a small project as the Patterson-Gimlin footage. Before we dive any deeper into the Patterson-Gimlin film, we should probably look at some of the controversies regarding the existence of Bigfoot, and why there are legitimate reasons to doubt the validity of the footage based on other cases around the Patterson-Gimlin film. Even the most devoted and fanatical Bigfoot believer has to admit the fact that there are a lot of fakery regarding Bigfoot. Hoax after hoax after hoax after hoax has been uncovered regarding Bigfoot. Everything from footprints to hair fibers to audio samples have either been hoaxed or simply mistaken as the products of a Bigfoot. And this also raises another interesting point that one has to keep in mind when regarding the validity of the Patterson-Gimlin film. Although I mentioned logical explanations as to why we haven't caught a Bigfoot yet at the beginning of this documentary, this doesn't actually make the existence of Bigfoot any more likely. It still is a bit odd that we never have caught a Bigfoot at this point. Yes, it is possible that a Sasquatch could hide in those dense forests. It is also possible that if it is intelligent enough, it could perhaps evade capture. Is it likely, however? Not really. Regarding the existence of Sasquatch, the two explanations of a dense forest and intelligence of the creature doesn't really suffice, in my opinion, as explanations as to why no Bigfoot has actually been caught yet, or any actual physical evidence from the creature itself for that matter. Surely at this point we should have found some actual hair fibers, skin cells, anything that could possibly give some kind of DNA from a Bigfoot. This is not the case, however. In not a single case where someone claims to be in possession of Bigfoot DNA have their papers withstood peer review. Not one single case. Let's take this case for instance. Dr. Melba Ketchum claimed to have analyzed hundreds of DNA samples of Bigfoot, and that some of them had been confirmed to belong to an unknown primate of some sort. However, her work, much like any other work so far regarding Bigfoot DNA, was turned down in peer review. They found her methods to be unsatisfactory. Her paper was eventually published, however, on a website called De Novo. The thing is though, the domain of the website for the supposed journal was purchased only 9 days before the publishing of this paper, and as of this day, it is the only paper ever published by this supposed journal. Now if you ask me, this is awfully suspicious, and I would not be surprised that this is nothing more than a hoax just to allow her to publish her paper. You see, I am in STEM, and I know from experience that peer review requires a very high standard. And if your research doesn't pass peer review, it's not their fault, it's yours. And whether Bigfoot believers want to admit it or not, the fact that no paper on Bigfoot regarding any DNA has actually passed peer review does cast a huge shadow on the validity of Bigfoot. The thing is though, we may soon not actually need a physical sample from a Bigfoot to prove the existence of Bigfoot through DNA. You may or may not have heard of the term eDNA. Well, eDNA stands for environmental DNA, and it is pretty much what you would expect. Basically, DNA technology has now evolved to such a point where you may not need a physical sample from a creature to prove its existence. You can simply take material from a certain environment, and if the creature has been there, they may have dropped some DNA behind. And thanks to our very fine and precise technology, we can now detect those minute amounts of DNA. eDNA has actually been used recently to confirm the existence of a species of fish, the Alabama sturgeon, which was believed to perhaps be extinct. However, eDNA showed that the species is still alive, even though no physical example as of yet has been found. What this ultimately means is that eDNA could perhaps prove the existence of Bigfoot in the future, even though we have no physical example of Bigfoot. This also means, however, that if we don't detect any eDNA of a Bigfoot, or at least of some kind of unknown primate, it will cast an even bigger shadow as to the existence of Bigfoot. Now, even though there's no scientific papers regarding any Bigfoot DNA that has withstood peer review, the same cannot be said regarding the proportions of the creature in the film. In fact, a lot of things about the creature just don't line up with human anatomy. If you analyze the film frame by frame, the creature in the film had a height of about 7 feet, and a chest circumference of over 80 inches. Your average human male has about 45 to 50 inches. And the weight of the creature has been calculated to about 500 pounds, considering the depth of the footprints that were left in the Sandy Creek bed. Although it is possible that a man who was about 7 feet tall could have been in a costume, things such as the circumference of the chest, as well as the huge weight that would have to be simulated by the creature, means that a lot of creativity would have gone into this hoax. But that's not all. In the film you can see a cranial crest, a ridge of bone along the top of the skull, which is very common to very large apes. And you can also see that the creature has breasts. The crest on the costume may be a fairly simple addition, but breasts would not be. Another thing is the sheer anatomy of the creature. The arms of the creature are longer than those you would find in a human being. In humans, when the arms are rested, the hands come to about mid-thigh level. However, the hands of the creature in the Patterson film are extended nearly to the knees. The only way this could be faked would be by using arm extenders, which would be another huge cost for someone like Patterson, who simply didn't have the capital to afford such a suit. What about the way the creature walks? The creature does have a very strange gait. However, it's not impossible to duplicate in a human being. And unlike what Bigfoot believers want to tell you, the way the creature walks is not in any way indicative of the validity of the film. The way the creature walks can be perfectly replicated with human beings, and it has been. You do, however, have some interesting details regarding the creature in the film. Even to an untrained eye, it becomes apparent that what seems to be fat deposits are visible under the skin. One can also note muscle fibers under the fur. The reason this is important is because even with modern special effects, This is very hard to duplicate. Even with modern costume making, it is very difficult to accurately represent fat distribution on a body as well as muscle fibers under the skin. No matter how you slice this cake, the facts remain. If this is a costume, it is the most advanced costume for its time. Bill Munns is a special effects technician who has many decades of experience in the field of special effects. And he is one of many special effects experts who have analyzed the footage, and in his opinion, it's likely genuine. Because to him, if it was faked, it's one of the best fakes ever in cinema history, and it would have been accomplished by two guys in the forest with no experience in filmmaking, having no budget for a film. Before we look at his analysis on the film, I will bring up one last point regarding the validity of the footage. A man by the name of Bob Hieronymus has come forward and claimed to be the man in the suit. According to him, Patterson hired him to be the beast, provided the ape suit, and gave him directions to meet them at a gas station on the edge of a small town near the chosen filming site. He put on the suit, did the now famous walk and look back over his shoulder, and drove back to Yakima. Once back home, he showed the suit in the back of his mother's Buick to a few friends at a local tavern before Patterson-Gimlin got back to Yakima and took the suit. Specifics in Hieronymus' story have fluctuated significantly over the years, on occasion seemingly in response to Patterson-Gimlin supporters' published of-aired argument about how certain aspects of his version didn't jibe with reality. Where his story is hardest to accept is on his almost non-existent grasp of the geography or topography where the film was shot, the route he followed to get there, and the place where he supposedly met up with Gimlin and Patterson. His description of the latter, a gas station just as you come into town, matched nothing near the filming area. Not a Bluff Creek, nearest the filming area, nor in Weichpec, the nearest town where the only gas station had to be reached by a long bridge over a deep river gorge, or at Willow Creek, which was another 23 miles south from Weichpec, which was already south and west of the film site. And Hieronymus' description of the dirt road leading to Patterson and Gimlin's camp and then to the film site, where multiple film crews have returned to film recreations of the original, again misses the mark. His description of the 2 to 5 mile pull up this long hill to the campsite is profoundly different than the actual Bluff Creek Road of 1967, which had more than 20 miles of up and down switchbacks to the only viable roadside camping area. Of course, 1967 was a long time ago, and memories fade, right? The reason why people cling on to Bob Hieronymus' story of him being the guy in the suit, and why they argue that this completely demolishes the validity of the Patterson-Gimlin film, is because Bob Hieronymus was given and passed a lie detector test by Jim McCormick, a Yakima police polygraph expert, as well as a similar test on the lie detector television program.
To Lie Detector, everybody. The abominable snowman, the Loch Ness monster. I mean, a rogues gallery of scary creatures, but none compares to the legendary Bigfoot. Now, I don't know about you, but every time I see those creepy pictures of that Bigfoot walking across a grassy meadow, it always sends shivers up my back. Our next guest says he can ease our anxiety by eliminating at least one name from the Monster Hall of Fame. Why, you ask? Because he says he's Bigfoot. Legends like Bigfoot seem to have always been around. But Bob Hieronymus says that the myth of the giant Yeti exploded onto the scene in the late 1960s when he was filmed in a remote part of Northern California wearing a furry ape suit. Bob says it was hard work. He spent time perfecting the now infamous arm-swinging, big-stepping Bigfoot walk and negotiated the uneven terrain through tiny slits in the scary-looking mask. He says the suit was hot too, layered with heavy animal-like fur. Bob nearly fainted from the heat of the day. Bob's finally going public, even though he knows that some folks still want to believe in the legend. Really Bigfoot, or just a big liar? The lie detector is soon to find out. Bob, you're here today with a very unusual claim that you are actually Bigfoot.
It's over, it's done. I decided that people should know the truth, that that film was a hoax.
What's the reaction been back at home?
Everybody's, says it's about time you come out, said, told them the truth.
It's time for people to know the truth.
Right.
Well, are you ready to face the lie detector?
Yes, I am.
Bigfoot Bob?
Yes, I am.
All right, let's get you hooked up.
Okie dokie.
Bob, please remain still. The test is about to begin.
All questions must be answered by yes or no.
Do you plan to tell the truth on this test about whether you were the Bigfoot shown in the 1967 Patterson film?
Yes.
Relevant questions must be specific.
Bob, be advised any attempts at countermeasures will invalidate this test.
We allow time between questions to ensure that we record all of the reactions.
Are you now sitting down?
Yes.
Were you the Bigfoot shown in the 1967 Patterson film?
Yes.
This is a relevant question.
Is it something else you're afraid I'll ask you a question about, even though I told you I wouldn't?
No.
We introduce a question that isn't scored just to compare against reactions to other questions regarding the main, or what we call the relevant issue.
Was that you in a Bigfoot costume portrayed in the 1967 Patterson film?
Yes.
This test is over. Remain still for 10 seconds, please.
Well, now's the moment of truth. Bob Hieronymus is going to walk away from lie detector today with a brand new label. Either it's going to be the real Bigfoot or a really big liar. Here are Bob's results. Bob, you came on lie detector today to tell the whole nation that you are the real Bigfoot. We asked you the following relevant question. Was that you in a Bigfoot costume portrayed in the 1967 Patterson film? To which you answered yes. Bob, the lie detector has determined that you are... Bob, you're telling the truth.
Well, I always knew it was the truth. Everybody that I'm associated with, I've been around, knew it was the truth. I'm glad it's over. I had the best guy in the country give me this test. Now, I can prove to the world that I was in the Patterson Bigfoot film.
To people who argue that Bigfoot is just one big hoax, this entire thing seems like a slam dunk. And why not? If you disregard that his story is not very consistent, and that the suit would have to be the most advanced suit by 1967, created by amateurish filmmakers with zero budget, him passing a lie detector claiming to be the guy in the suit is indeed very convincing. Except, Roger Patterson also passed a lie detector test. Prior to publishing an April 1968 article about the Patterson-Gimlin film, a National Wildlife magazine's editors, not wanting to run a story about a film that might prove later to be bogus, requested that Patterson submit a lie detector test. He agreed, and the test was done by a reputable and retired New York City polygraph expert. According to George Harrison, who became the magazine's managing editor in 1972, Patterson passed the test, and the magazine ran the story. Obviously, both of these people can't be correct on their stories. They are directly contradicting one another. And yet, they both passed a lie detector, which means that any lie detector result regarding the validity of the footage is a moot point. This aspect can't be used one way or another to determine the validity of the footage. Now let's watch Bill Munn's analysis of the footage.
The site is revealed. Now, investigators will collect detailed data about the purported Bigfoot itself to graphically reconstruct the creature and place it here in a digitally accurate version of Bluff Creek. And with the help of the scan's extreme detail and 360-degree view, investigators may finally determine whether the creature captured on film by Patterson was real. As these astonishing images emerge, a remarkable restoration effort is underway to examine the Patterson-Gimlin film itself. Bigfoot researcher, computer animator, and Hollywood costume designer Bill Munns is at the home of Mrs. Patricia Patterson, the widow of Roger Patterson. Since her husband's death in 1972, Mrs. Patterson has kept the precious film in a bank vault. She's given Munns rare access to a first-generation copy of the film. This is the first time she's allowed anyone into her home to analyze it. It's a breakthrough for all Bigfoot researchers. Until this access, most television programs and analysis had to use copies of the film. And because this is the only apparently credible piece of Bigfoot footage in the world, the film has been copied and recopied over and over. Each time it's lost clarity and gained noise and artifacts that have distorted the image.
There are examples where in one of the rephotographing process, an artifact was introduced that made it look like we saw the thumb and the hand curl like this. Now, that actually isn't in the film. Being able to sort out some of these things will do a great deal for us in the evaluation of this film, so that at least if we're going to argue about the aspects of the body of the subject, at least we're actually arguing about true anatomical features and not film artifacts and false details introduced by process.
The scanning system Munns will use is unique, something he developed just for this project. He's linked a 70-year-old Keystone projector to a state-of-the-art camera and computer. Using the projector, he can advance the priceless film frame by hand to avoid any damage.
With a mechanical scanner where the film is automated through it, I would worry very seriously about the prospect of it causing some kind of damage to the film when it's in this age and there's this much potential for brittleness.
As the film is advanced, the camera takes a picture of each frame and sends it to the computer, which saves each frame as an individual file. This process will enable Munns to stabilize and examine the images later in high definition. It will provide the best opportunity ever to determine whether the image in the film is Bigfoot or a man in a fur suit. So the investigative team returns to the most compelling yet controversial piece of evidence: the Patterson-Gimlin film. For film analyst Bill Munns, the film may contain hidden detail if he can resolve a problem with the original camera footage shot by Roger Patterson.
Now, what you need to appreciate is that when Roger was actually filming this, he was running, moving around quite a bit, shaking the camera to a great degree. When we actually watch the film in its true form, there is so much movement of the camera, it's actually very, very difficult to watch the subject walking through the picture.
Some analysts say that even the original images are so grainy that the film is too poor to be useful. But Munns believes his restoration will make the picture significantly sharper. Munns' first step is to stabilize the film itself, frame by frame, to compensate for Patterson's movements. This process will create the clearest version of the film ever analyzed. After a month of painstaking work, the results are stunning. The stabilized high-definition film prepared by Munns is on the left, the original on the right. But will it help answer the question of whether Bigfoot exists? So the researchers return to the closest thing they have to a living, breathing Bigfoot: the creature in the Patterson film. Film analyst Bill Munns hopes to determine once and for all whether the Patterson Bigfoot is man or beast. To do this requires a precise comparative anatomical analysis, and Munns is well qualified to study anatomy. As a former Hollywood creature effects maker, he's had to figure out how to put performers into odd costumes and make them believable. He knows that there are certain body positions that can't be faked when putting an actor into a suit. He starts by lining up a human model with the Patterson Bigfoot.
So what we have here is actually a sequence of frames, 9 in total, where each one has the figure matched up. This one's particularly valuable because of the sharp knee bend. There's virtually no way with any costume that we could alter where the knee is going to bend on the subject.
In short, an actor's knees must line up with the knees in a costume. But lining up an actor's knees means that neither his ankles or hips will line up with Patterson's Bigfoot. He also notes that the arms of a human would need to be 10% longer to fit in a suit. But team member Peter Brook showed Hollywood-style arm extensions could be used to make the arms appear longer. The torso of the creature in the Patterson film is also longer than a typical human, and the hip is lower. If an actor's shoulders are lined up, then the hip is too high on the human. Match the hips and the shoulders fall short. But it's the legs that really seem unusual.
The most curious thing that I found is in the leg proportions themselves. We have a very long upper leg and a very short lower leg by comparison. This particular configuration is exceedingly rare on human beings. The anatomical proportions of the body are extremely unusual and suggest to me that it would be very, very hard to find a human being who has the appropriate anatomy to wear a suit, even if you made one.
Arms and torso too long. Hips too low. Legs out of proportion with a human. And the joints can't be made to line up with a human in a suit. To Munns, this can mean only one thing. These proportions are more like an ape, not a man.
All of these add up to something which, in my mind, is biologically real and not a human in any type of costume.
This is the very first episode of Analysed. I made this segment on my channel to be different from Debunked. In Debunked, I debunk things clearly. This segment, however, is supposed to be more about nuance. This is for subjects where I perhaps can't debunk something, and this is one of those cases. I told you at the beginning of this video that I would probably piss off both camps, and that's because I can't call it either way. On one hand, the technology that they would have to have access to fake the creature in the footage would have to be the most advanced technology in cinematography at the time, and they would have to get a hold of that somehow with a zero budget. The proportions of the creature also simply do not line up with a human being and would be very hard to fake, especially in 1967. At the same time, though, it is odd that we have not found any actual physical evidence for the creature. No DNA has ever been confirmed to be from an unknown primate in the area, and every single testimony can be logically explained to be something else than a Bigfoot. And all the supposed physical evidence that would point to the existence of a Bigfoot can be logically explained away as misidentifications or hoaxes. And with the development of eDNA, I'm sure in the near future, we will either confirm the existence of Sasquatch or cast even more doubts as to its existence. But as of this day, without any physical evidence, with nothing else but this footage to point to the existence of Bigfoot, I can't call this footage valid. And yet, because of how difficult this would actually be to fake, I can't call the footage debunked either. And so, unexpectedly, I'm gonna call this possibly real, meaning that the creature is possible, yet to be confirmed.